If you're hearing this, I'm already dead. I say it at the start, not for drama, but to set the clock. What follows bypasses every normal channel that would dull it down and bury it under routine. I have verified what I can, and I have redacted what I must. Names are changed, coordinates are shaved, serial numbers are scrubbed where they expose live kit. But the instruments do not lie, and the instruments are where this begins. I have cross-checked air movement logs out of Breeze Norton against a tail number that should have been in depot maintenance that week. I pulled weather archives for the Alto Solomois Basin for a date that does not officially host flights. I matched HF propagation reports with a burst transmission caught by a ham operator 2 countries away. I have seen the SATCOM billing, the fuel chits, and a photocopied manifest with a column of black rectangles where 7 names should be. Under one of those rectangles is a faint imprint, as if someone pressed too hard while scrubbing, the shape of a letter S, the shadow of a 4. I have the photographs that aren't photographs, thermal stills of jungle night that register hotter than the air they pass through, a LiDAR slice that shows a structure sitting where no structure sits. The ground truth says forest, but the pulse return insists on planes, angles, recesses, and a void that drinks signal. The first time I looked at the scan, my eyes slid over the center as if the page were oiled. That smear on your vision? That is the story. There are receipts from a clinic in Iquitos, Spanish language intake for a man whose chart says dehydration and whose pupils track like a concussed diver. There is a customs stamp with the day carved down by a bureaucrat's razor, one number overwritten so cleanly you only see the extra ink in oblique light. There's a photo of a kit bag with a unit patch that never existed, stitched 0.5 millimeter off spec. The needle skipped at the wrong moment. The seam is the tell. I have voice, audio from a body-worn recorder that is supposed to be dead hardware. The noise floor carries the jungle, cicadas, a microwave hiss from wet leaves after rain, the slow drip from a fern's throat. Under that, a tone that is not a tone, breathing that is not breathing. The recorder logs say battery at 0%. The file exists anyway. It watches, but you can't trust it to save you. You listen. You hear footfalls couple with your own pace half a beat late, as if something learned the cadence and is practicing. I went to the map. The public map shows canopy and river braids that move every year. The private map, someone's forgotten export from a mining concession tender, shows anomalies that were once pitched as iron. They are not iron. The magnetometer data, which I obtained from a doctoral candidate who thought she was measuring lightning scars, spikes in a geometry that weather does not make. 3 peaks at equal intervals. Then silence. Then a trough so clean it looks like a machine exhale. Why not take this to the usual desks? Because the usual desks already touched it. I reached a man whose card says Cultural Heritage Risk, and whose email headers route through an office that never answers FOIAs. He was polite. He was curious. Then he stopped answering. 2 days later, a courier envelope arrived with a paper only a military clerk would love. 3 pages of do not discuss statements. No letterhead, no signature. 4 different fonts. The kind of carelessness you use when you want the shape of fear more than the force of law. I burned it in a metal tray by the sink. The ash tasted metallic and left my mouth dry for an hour. This is the part where I say what had to be erased. A town name. Gone. A river bend. Rounded into abstraction. A tail number. transposed. One of the men carried a ring with a notch where a diamond should be. The notch stays, the metal goes. If you are reading along later, you'll see the black bars. If you are listening now, you'll hear the pauses. I am not protecting institutions. I am keeping living people able to sleep. The stakes? A machine, or a structure that behaves like one. A presence that stepped where mud should keep you honest and left nothing. It was not superstition. It was not myth. It was fieldcraft meeting something that treated fieldcraft like a children's game. You cannot run this through a newsroom fact-checker whose world ends at procurement databases. You cannot pitch it as a ghost story to an editor who wants haunted cathedrals and candles. The jungle does not care about your genre. It binds, contains, awakens. I hold a notebook. The paper fibers lift with sweat. There's the smell of hot dust off a transformer coil I do not see, in a forest where there is no mains power. My throat tastes of ozone after a dry thunder that did not crack the sky. The notes on the first page are brisk, professional, boring. Ingress 0341. Baro 998 millibars. Comms check green. By the third page, the writing skews uphill. There is a line. Footsteps behind us. Count is wrong. There is a box around the word wrong. It is pressed so hard the ink bled through to the cardboard back. The operative who gave me this did not want absolution. He wanted record. He identified himself not by name but by trade and date and kit. He said he carried the guilt like a coin in his pocket, smooth now from worry. He said a human voice is a kind of instrument and that the jungle tuned his down. He asked if I would keep one promise. Tell it straight, or don't tell it at all. He sent me a drive that failed as soon as it completed the transfer, as if some fuse was designed to blow. The files that survived are enough to convict reality of a lie. I will not gild this. I am not your priest. I am an instrument reader with a deadline. I have the debrief, the unofficial one, the one recorded in a motel under a name that belongs to a dead uncle. I have the mission card, laminated, creased once down the center like a prayer folded into a pocket. I have the smell of mold where the card stayed damp for too long. I have what counts, the testimony. What follows is the operative's account as he gave it to me, unadorned, clinical, human. What follows is the operative's testimony. I was Staff Sergeant Rowan, UKSF, Signals and Demolitions, Tier 1 assignment under a liaison umbrella that did not officially exist. Clearance, Strike Sierra, compartmented. The mission date on our card read 14th August, year withheld, offset +4 days in all official ledgers. Staging coordinates were given as Etsu 3° 46, 062 Diga 11W, west of Manaus, east of Letitia, rounded to the nearest minute and wrong by just enough to keep casual eyes busy. Cover story. Advisory attachment to a Brazilian task force targeting illegal mining sites and river piracy along the Upper Solimois. The badge on our flight cases said ENV Controls. It wasn't a joke, but it wasn't the truth. Team of 6, plus a local pilot we never counted as ours. Captain Ash, troop commander, rifle with clipped sling for fast transitions, Oxford accent sanded to nothing by heat and habit. He carried a laminated map book and a pelican case of paper orders, which is how you hide real orders, by drowning them in paper. Sergeant Mack, medic, ex-A&E, neat handwriting, tourniquet wrapped flat against his sling like origami. He could recite drug interactions without looking down. Corporal Hobbs, EOD, patient hands, a man who loved the sound of nothing happening. He wore a patch that said, "Hearing safe," because he thought it was funny. Corporal Kite, comms, my shadow and sometimes my mirror, dual radios, burst box, a field laptop with a key that clicked like a Geiger when humidity got under it. Private Farah, linguist and point, Brazilian Portuguese like a native, Spanish good enough to buy trouble and get change. He had family somewhere upriver and the muscle memory of a man who avoided saying that out loud. I rounded it out. Rowan, signals to demolitions, SATCOM, magnetics, and whatever else you hand the bloke who reads instruments before he breathes. Human steak, clean and unromantic. A ring box in my Bergen with no ring inside. The stone was a repair away, and money isn't what stops you. Time is. She said yes, pending the return, pending the right table and the light you remember later. I had a text I didn't send. It stayed unsent all the way in and most of the way out. Official mission, environmental radiological survey and material accountability at a decommissioned research kiosk. Supposedly an old university weather station converted by a private mining concession into a baseline sampler. We were to verify that sealed sources used to calibrate soil density probes, CS-137, AMB, the unglamorous toys, were all accounted for and not being rerouted into anything a provincial governor would have to pretend not to notice. We would also confirm there was no enrichment residue in the ore, because rumors make markets move and markets get men killed. The briefing was held in a hangar in Tabatinga that smelled of hot dust and JP-8. A fan turned and didn't cool anyone. We had the usual, printed SAT images with the useful bits gray-smeared out, a river chart marked with grease pencil, a contingency table that said, no escalation outside environmental scope. Then the odd bits. The liaison officer, call sign Provost, kept stepping away from the map to take calls where he stood, nodding to no one, phone upside down. The colonel who owned the hangar never took off his sunglasses, even inside. When we signed the kit ledger, the serial numbers were already filled in under our names, as if the kit had picked us before we arrived. Kite asked for the HF call book. Provost said, "You won't need it," and put his finger on the page anyway. Electromagnetics first hint. The field laptop booted with the system clock set 19 minutes ahead of the wall clock and refused to sync to GPS time. Not drift, lock. When I tried to correct it, the BIOS threw a checksum error and then accepted the change on the third try without complaint. A tiny thing, a hairline crack in a dam you don't yet see. Max pulse oximeter read 96% on everyone, a touch low for sea level. Not unheard of in heat, but the hangar's old barometer said 1006 millibars, and the air felt heavy in the mouth, like the inside of a transformer cabinet. Instruments notice first. You learn to write those notes without scaring the room. We packed light for weight and heavy for failure. 2 PRC-163s, 1 HF manpack, 2 Iridium handsets, 1 burst box with a prepaid window none of us had seen before, 4 helmet cams we never trusted but always wore, 1 FLIR monocular with a cracked lens that still worked if you swore at it. Hobbs had 2 friendly charges. Linear cutters with flechette traps reversed to keep blast clean, and a cutter for steel that looked like a toy until it bit. Ash divided the ammo with the calm of a man doing long division. 1 stim, 1 sopor, 1 antiemetic each because jungle missions run on salt and spite and the things that keep both inside you. Paperwork was thin. We had a mission card with 3 blocks: insertion, survey, extraction. No block for contact, no block for capture, no block for Cassivac. We're in and out like meter readers, Ash said. He meant it as comfort and also as a warning. Meter readers don't carry extra batteries for deep tunnels. Provost told us the site was Old German and smirked at his own mystery. He said the access hatch was probably gone under vines and melt. He said locals avoided it because miners are superstitious and police are tired. He said our biggest risk was river sickness and cartels who do not shoot first if they can count your money first. Stay sleek, he said, which is a word nobody in uniform uses unless they learned it, from someone who does not sweat. Night before we lifted, Kite and I did a comms walk outside the hangar under sodium lights. The HF whip sang even with no wind. On receive only, we got a carrier with a heartbeat flutter, faint, regular, like a damaged tape loop. It was there when we faced west. It died when we turned the antenna south. We logged it as local RFI because that's what you write when you don't know yet that your map is wrong. We slept in a prefab with a humming aircon that made the walls sweat. I dreamed of the river and of a light beneath it, the way a city looks from an airplane at night but close, bright enough to make the water turn to glass. When I woke, my mouth tasted like someone had passed a welding wand an inch from my tongue. I wrote it down and did not tell anyone. You hold some things to test them against what comes next. We lifted before dawn in an H-60 variant the Brazilians called a Black Hawk when they spoke to foreigners and by another name among themselves. Tail numbers were taped over and then taped over again, a matryoshka of deniability. The pilot was a thin man with pilot's hands and a badge on his chest that had been unstitched and restitched so many times the fabric read like palimpsest. He said nothing except to say there would be a river turn, and then another, and then we would forget which way we had come. The aircraft smelled of hot oil and old rope. I checked comms, VHF to air, UHF to our net, HF cold but ready. The PRC-163 gave me green lights that meant connected to everything and everyone. Being connected and being heard are not the same, but you start with the lie the radio tells and work backwards. Kite ran a burst test into the box. The LED pulsed once, twice, then nothing. He shrugged. We'd try again on the ground. Below us the jungle folded in sheets, green, black, green, the river cutting in braids and returning to itself like a thought you cannot shake. The weather was a low lid, cloud at 2,000, a smear of light on the eastern rim. The gauge in my wrist strap read 1,002 millibars, the raw smell of rain in the air, but no rain yet. The pilot pointed with 2 fingers and we saw a tin roof, then another, then nothing again for 10 minutes of rotor time. Tabatinga had been a grid, 1 runway, 1 hangar, 1 fuel farm, 1 chain link. The forward base was a mistake carved into mud. A bulldozed rectangle, 2 shipping containers set as if they had landed from low orbit and sunk to their axles. A windsock that could do nothing even if there had been wind. An Amazonian army captain met us in a stained t-shirt and spoke to Farah while the rotors wound down. He had the look of a man who had stopped pretending he could go home clean. He pointed at the sky and then at the ground, and then at a stack of jerry cans that contained 1/3 fuel and 2/3 hope. Badge color at the gate, if you could call the dogleg in the wire a gate, was orange for advisory. Our escort patch was a jaguar's head. The eyes were sewn wrong, one pupil slightly oval, giving the cat a tilted, human look. The captain gave us a plastic card with a barcode and no bar reader. For the checkpoint upriver, Farah translated and didn't meet anyone's eyes. Terrain forward, floodplain rising to a low ridge where the map ended. The base layout could be drawn with a child's pencil. One pad, one mast with a dish the size of a dustbin lid, 2 tents, a generator wrapped in tarps that flapped like a fish. Comms checks, VHF to the mast, local net good within a kilometer, HF still cold and stubborn, SATCOM refusing to pass the time sync to the field laptop. The system clock crept 5 seconds ahead as we watched, then settled, as if ashamed to be seen drifting. When I ran a handheld magnetometer sweep along the mast, it chirped on the downwind side with no metal present. The air moved under my hand in a way air does not move without heat. The cloud edge to the west glowed as if lit from beneath. We loaded a boat older than any of us and set out like meter readers. The river wore a skin of oil where it doubled back. Dark grains rode the surface like pepper. Farah said something about dredge up river and stopped. We kept to the shaded side, engine low, rifles under tarps, lenses fogging and clearing in cycles like breath. The FLIR showed nothing special until it did. A block of colder-than-ambient that hung in the air above the bend, a rectangle gone by the time I blinked, the afterimage a bruise on the sensor's memory. First instrument anomaly. A thing colder than the moving morning air, suspended over warm water. Kite tapped the monocular casing. The image did not return. Ash made the call to keep moving. We cut engine and drifted under branches that shed rain in little knives. The smell shifted, wet leaf, then something like hot copper, the taste you get when a battery touches the tongue. The GPS declared we were stationary while the river slid us 20 meters sideways. I recalibrated on a clearing, got a fix, looked away to stow the unit, looked back, and the fix had shifted 9 meters without movement. Multipath, I said, because it is the right word when the wrong thing happens. The kiosk we were supposed to find was marked on the map as a square with a dot. The grid reference put it on a hummock where spindly trees grew and lean lianas hung. On arrival, nothing. No tin, no mast, no post holes, no footprint in the leaf litter. Birds were noisy 50 meters out and silent here. I clicked the handheld Geiger out of habit. It ticked once for show and then steadied at background. Mac looked relieved in a way that meant he had been holding his breath. Hobbs gave me a side look and pulled his glove tighter like he was cold. We put on nets and cut our way into plants that did not want us. The ground dipped in a way the eye could not see until you were in it. My boot sank and came up with a skin of black grains clinging like powder. They left an oil sheen on water pooled in my tread. When the sun broke the cloud for a second, light struck the grains and split. Not rainbow, not prismatic. It was as if the color slid sideways and hid under the leaf. We ran another comms check. Everything was green. VHF carried. UHF carried. SAT pinged. The burst box LED blinked, then held steady like a held breath. We sent the word on-site. The box returned ACK in a timing pattern that didn't match any window I had seen. Kite marked the time in his book. I marked the taste of ozone in my mouth and did not tell the others it felt like standing near a live coil. Survey circle, Ash said, and we walked it. 10 meters, 20, 30. Mosquitoes at the edges, fewer in the center. Thermals showed a heat bloom below ground where the sun hadn't reached, oval, 3 by 5 meters. The GPS said we were on top of something that did not exist on the SAT image, and the SAT image said the canopy here was denser than anywhere for half a kilometer. 2 maps, 2 lies. We cut a cross-section. Soil gave way too easily. Roots sheared with a rubbery pop, like cutting fat. At 40 centimeters, Hobbs's shovel struck metal with a sound that carried up our bones. Not corrugated tin. Plate. I brushed it. Cold, then hot, the way a tool left in the sun burns you. The paint, if it was paint, came off like black skin and left a dull gray beneath. I recognized the sound of my own breath inside the net and realized I had been holding it again. The pilot had said we would forget which way we had come. Standing on that plate with the river still close enough to smell, I believed him. The compass in my wrist drifted 5 degrees west and stayed there, smiling. Kite held up a hand, the signal for quiet, and we heard it too. Not chanting, not voice. A carrier tone the jungle had no right to carry, very faint, like a calm machine reading out the time to something that did not use clocks. Surface said empty. Instrument said, "You're on it." Thermals painted a shape below like a handprint pressed into wet clay and left to harden. GPS insisted we were centered on a structure whose roof map was the forest floor. The river noise staged a cover for our noise and then cut, as if a fader had been pulled. We cleared the humus to the edges of the plate. The metal lip showed first, beveled, with a channel packed with old resin. Hobbs scraped it with a blade. The shavings clung to the steel and to his glove, as if magnetized, then fell in a way dust should not fall, too fast, as if the air were thicker at the ground. Under a smear of black skin we found gray metal that rang dull when tapped. "Soviet," Hobbs said, because that's what you say when you see a certain style at hinge. Overbuilt, no forgiveness. Made to be hit with a hammer. The plate had no language on it. No stamp. Just 4 countersunk bolts where a handle might once have been. The bolts cut, flush, and peened. Heat came up through the plate. Not the soft heat of sun on iron, but the dry heat of a room with machines. My face net sagged toward it like a leaf toward light. The surrounding ground was cool to the touch. When I palmed the plate edge through glove leather, I felt the low thrum you get standing above a generator set. No generator in the jungle runs that steady. Sensory wrongness moved in attack waves. A radio tone that felt like a voice but carried no modulation. The taste of old pennies behind the teeth. The faint smell of hot dust like you get when a transformer coil bites air. The dark sand grains that clung to our boots resolved under bright light into angular particles with an oil sheen. Not mica, not silt. When I breathed through a damp buff, I could feel grit settle in the throat and not move, as if the air itself had weight. We found the access seam under a mat of roots. Wrong era hardware sealed in the right era jungle. A submarine hatch, but not a design I knew. Hinges hidden within hinges. A lip that would seat flush and make itself the ground. Burn scoring marked the corners, not from above, no brush fire leaves that pattern, but from below, through hairline gaps in the metal. Hobbs whistled without sound and tapped where a blast plate had discolored. If this let go once, he said, it wanted to keep it. We set a perimeter of common sense in a place that had none. Farah faced the green. Ash measured risk like a civil engineer, not a poet. He made it simple. In, confirm. Out, report. He didn't say if, but we heard it. Kate drew the schematic of our ignorance on a page and wrote numbers where there should have been words. Breach prep looked like it always looks, until it didn't. We cut the seam with a drum saw that complained at once, the motor note choking as if the metal ate torque. Sparks came and then died faster than they had any right to. They fell around the cut in a halo and went black mid-air, like fireflies changing their minds. Hobbs changed blades twice. The second blade wore a trench in 15 seconds that would have taken 10 minutes on ship steel. "It wants," he said, and didn't finish the thought. We pivoted to thermals. The hatch was 42 degrees Celsius at the center, 37 at the hinge line, 28 at the soil margin. The air above it drew down, barely, as if a room below exhaled through teeth. I put a stethoscope against the plate and heard structure, mass beyond. Not emptiness, layers. The carrier tone rose and fell under the noise like breath. Not human, not a motor I recognized. The pitch was wrong and the harmonics laid on top of each other like a stack of glass. We tried the bolts. They laughed. Hobbs set his friendly charge along the hinge line and squinted. "We're going to scar this," he said. "Not open it. Scar it." He set the initiator and backed us away, and we put our bodies behind the thickest tree we could find in a place where trees are all muscle and no bone. The blast thumped. Leaves fell with a metallic sound as if dust carried iron. When the smoke cleared, we had a line, not a gap, a line, fine as a hair, dark as engine oil. We forced wedges into the line. The steel flexed the way a bar flexes when you believe it won't. Slow, arrogant, humming in a key I've only ever heard from bridge cables in wind. The air merging was hot and dry. The jungle's wet, pulled back like a curtain. My eyes watered. The tone in the radio rose half a step without anyone keying anything. Instrument first. Fear second. I checked the Geiger and heard it tick once like a courtesy knock. Then nothing. Farah said he heard voices and then said he didn't. He translated for the captain in my head. A man, not here, a man back at the pad. Because that is what a brain does under pressure. It gives you work you cannot do. We all heard something. We all wrote it down differently. Mac called it a steady. Kite called it timing. Hobbs called it not ours. We opened the hatch the way you open stubborn truth, by insisting. The hinge complained, the resin tore, and the plate rose on a geometry that made poor sense. The hatch did not swing. It sank and then slid sideways as if running on rails set into stone. Heat rolled up. My glasses fogged and cleared with a wet click. The smell was an old machine shop. Oil, hot windings, faint singe of air that has been pushed through a coil for too long. Below, ladder rungs cut into concrete, then replaced by bolted steel at a depth our lamps could not immediately reach. Walls poured, not stacked. The top course carried symbols burned into the concrete, repeating geometry at small intervals, shallow, dark, as if heat had been pressed against wet mix before cure. They were not letters. They were not numbers. They were rhythm, you see, rather than hear. Looking at them made my eyes focus at the wrong distance. Ash looked at the hole and then at us. "Quick look," he said, the phrase that keeps men alive or kills them softly. We clipped in with a single rope and a spare double-checked harnesses with the dumb patience of people who have learned to check after they are sure, because being sure is the first lie. I put my hand to the rung. It was warm. I went first because it was my rope and my guilt if it failed. The ladder rungs ran 30 meters, then 40, then a last pitch that put our boots on a landing at roughly 50, counted by breath, not altimeter, because the altimeter read wrong by a constant 12 meters and then righted itself the second we stopped moving. Heat rose off the shaft in steady bands, like standing above a server farm. The air tasted ionized, the coin bite on the tongue you get when someone arcs a welder too near. The walls were poured concrete that had set against something hot. At shoulder height, every 2 hand spans, a symbol repeated. Shallow, burned-in loops and chevrons, nested triangles that refused to fix focus. You looked, and your eyes tried to focus behind the wall. The geometry hummed in your molars. Max said, "Stencil," and then touched one with a gloved knuckle and winced, like a low-voltage fence had told him to leave it alone. I logged the pattern length and stopped when I realized I had been counting past cents. Gear misbehaved the way trained animals misbehave. Not random, not constant, willful. The helmet cams returned preview feeds to Kite's tablet, bite-sized, clean, correctly time-stamped. The save buffer stayed at 0%. The UI blinked "recording," and then forgot it as soon as you took your eyes off it. Radios kept their connected green. The moment we keyed to send a rehearsal check up to the surface, the waveform flatlined for the duration of the syllables and sprang back live when we let go. Compass drifted in lazy spirals. My wrist readout swung through 8 degrees and then parked 2 off north as if embarrassed. The only things that behaved were the things with no clock. We moved along a corridor with inset conduits. Modern, braided, snapped with tie wraps that looked factory fresh. The conduit dove into the wall through cores cut after pore. Bronze rings set into the concrete marked every junction, not decorative, flanged as if they once held something heavier than wire. At each ring, the concrete carried the same burned geometry. Deeper here, edges crisp, like a stamp applied while the wall was still green and the stamp was still hot. Our light found rails. Old, narrow-gauge rails set into the floor and then sawed off at both ends. The cut faces burred as if done in a hurry and ground the minimum to keep shins whole. The steel smelled like old shops, oil, iron filings, dust fried on hot metal. I ran a magnet along a plate near the rail. It chattered in my hand across a grid I could not see. A field. Weak. Regular. Not AC hum. The spacing was wrong. We heard footsteps in our pace. One half-beat behind, careful, learning. The jungle above is sloppy with sound. Down here, everything was naked. The echo said 5 bodies. My count made 6. I called a halt and held a light in the landing where we'd just been. Nothing. Shadow where the ladder mouth opened. No figure. No heat signature. Ghost, Hobbs said, meaning unknown. Not the other thing. We chalked a date on the wall at knee height. When I looked back 30 seconds later, the lines had softened as if the concrete were humid enough to drink chalk. The grit on my glove had the feel of fine graphite. At the first turn, the floor slicked under us. A skin of black grains lay like spilled abrasive. They ran to the low points with a lazy tide. When Ash planted his boot, the grains flowed around the sole rather than under it, parting, rejoining, leaving no smear. Our lights hit them and the reflection didn't rainbow. It sidestepped color entirely. A cold slide sideways, unhelpful to the eye. We passed a junction where the corridor dog-legged around a wider space. The temperature stepped up 5 degrees in one stride. The carrier tone we'd heard above resolved into 2 tones beating together, a slow interference that pinned itself to my teeth. I checked the PRC. Bars full, link good. I keyed. Ash spoke 3 words for a test. The waveform disappeared on the transmit bar and reappeared as soon as he stopped talking. Connected and unheard. The radio watched but did not save. First entity glimpse came wrong. Farah's shadow split. He was 5 meters ahead, light at his back, and the outline that should have moved with him lagged a half pace and then crossed a patch of shine where no shadow held at all. It slid across the grain skin without claiming it. The boot fall behind me adjusted, learned, and fell in again. Mac turned his head slow and said my name like he was checking a patient would answer. I kept my rifle low because this was not a thing you point a muzzle at and pretend you can name. The corridor opened into a wider landing carved with the same burned geometry. At the lip of the next flight, the symbols overlapped, a palimpsest of heat presses made on different days, angles skidding out of plane. The lines made a rhythm that read like counting and then like swallowing. Kite lifted his camera and filmed. The preview feed showed the patterns crisp. The recording buffer still read 0%. We had a rule. If 3 different instruments give you nonsense, treat the nonsense as signal and adjust your frame. The altimeter read -9 meters compared to the top of the ladder. The thermometer was 3 degrees cooler than the sweat on my neck said it should be. The magnetometer chattered only when I pointed it at the bronze rings. The nonsense agreed with itself. We kept going. The stair spilled us into a chamber the size of a small church. Nave proportions without a god, machining without ornament. Ancient bronze rigs, hoops, yokes, toothed wheels seized in positions that suggested arrest rather than rest, were mounted into the concrete as if the pour had been done around them. From those rigs, modern conduits spidered to racks that any data center would recognize. Metal frames, DIN rails, breakers, fiber that dove into conversion boxes with English labels engraved too clean for field use. The air moved on a schedule you could feel but not see. It came warm and dry out of a throat in the floor where a grate sat like a confession booth. The smell was transformer coil, baked dust, a hint of phenolic resin. The bronze assemblies had pitted the way marine fittings pit, greenish bloom in creases. Yet the contact faces, where bronze met steel, where bronze kissed the anchor points, were polished bright, as if they worked yesterday. Control racks stood in 3 islands. Each had paired screens locked on hard text, no GUI, no mouse, white letters on black, the kind of console window you get when you've climbed inside a lab's skeleton. The top line on each screen read the same. Damascus Protocol. Status hold. Underneath ran timers that did not agree with each other and would not roll over. They accumulated digits to the left like they were measuring debt. A keyboard sat at each rack. Keys worn smooth in a pattern that said one set of hands had typed here many times. The letters were English. The labels riveted to the conduit read in English too. Neutron source, primary, feed pump A, scram interlock, isolation barrier. The fonts were 20th century, industrial, not museum. Kite swore quietly when he traced a cable bundle. It rose from a bronze yoke into a converter and then bled out to a panel that had lived a previous life on a reactor training loop. Warning legends ghosted by sun, carryovers of rad area with the rad scrubbed. The patchwork made a grammar my brain could parse. Old structure as fixture, modern kit as interface, both forced into a compact none of us would have designed. The panel meter needle sat just off 0, trembling in a breeze that didn't exist. I put a hand near a coil. Hairs on my wrist stood with a static that wasn't static. The beat of the 2 carrier tones palpated through skin. At the chamber's heart sat the anchor. No shrine, no myth. a core assembly in a caisson, concrete and lead by the look, with borated water plumbing and a serpentine of stainless that shouted heat exchanger without being asked. A tiny reactor, if you believe in tiny reactors. The geometry said pool type, training scale, but the feed-throughs had been reworked, not by amateurs. Someone had split the neutron source line, added a choke, then looped it into a bronze torus mounted above the core on an adjustable cradle. The torus had welds older than the cables but newer than the bronze. The weld bead was honest. Whoever did it cared. Max said, "That's nuclear." Not as a fright word, as a fact. He pointed to the boron content tags on the gasket kits. He pointed to the way the liners were stamped with the names of civil vendors we all recognized. He pointed to the quick disconnects where the torus met the feed, a maintenance convenience you install only if you plan to revisit. I pulled a maintenance log from a clipboard hung by habit on a hook. The dates were wrong in the bureaucratic way, day and month flipped, zeros where none belonged, but the hand that filled the blanks was consistent, neat, British or Commonwealth taught. Under System Name, a block print, Damascus Protocol. Under Purpose, Anchor, Bridge, Binder, Select. The word Select was underlined 3 times. Below, someone had circled Binder in pencil so hard the paper thinned and smarted. Technical read, they were using fission as ballast in a dimensional river. A neutron economy throttled not to heat exchange for power, but to stabilize a field in that bronze torus, whose field lines, if I listen to the magnetometer chatter, coupled to the burns in the concrete, to the geometry, to something the instruments wanted, to read as there. It wasn't mysticism, it was bad engineering repurposed as binding spell, except the spell was a feedback loop, and the loop had a control room with screens that wrote in plain English, containment phase. Active. Cost basis. Accruing. Kite tried a keyboard. The screen took his keystrokes, echoed them, ignored the command. He typed help because everyone does. The reply came as if from a hungover operator. Help context, 3, scram interlock, cost basis, anchor, tolerance. He chose cost basis. The paragraph did not bother with metaphor. Human remnants exchange per unit, time at threshold, stabilization apportionment. Below it, nominal payment per hour, 0.23 priors, team size adjusted. The units were bad. The math was clean. We looked at each other and looked away. In the far wall, a bronze frame held a glass not glass. No glare, no reflection. An aperture that returned an image like a screen with the backlight broken. It showed a corridor not ours and a space not this space, and yet the edges matched the edges of our frame. Through it, for an instant, passed a flicker of movement in the cadence of a man walking with us just out of phase. Heat rolled off the frame in bands. You could taste it as copper in the mouth. Each band aligned with one of the burned geometries on the floor like a standing wave pinned to the room. We should have scrammed the reactor and left. Ash said it with his eyes. He also said we didn't have a scram. It would be wired to protocol we didn't understand, and the price of a bad guess was a short lesson in steam explosions. Hobbs pointed to a manual pull that had been safety wired shut with fresh wire and a tag that read, "Binder decay, do not interfere." The knot was a sailor's knot. The cut ends were bright. I lifted the Geiger and heard the gentle hiss of normal background. It wasn't a radiological hazard. The hazard was that the system measured its own debt in hours, and had learned to settle that debt using what we carry when we walk into rooms. Time, memory, the sticky residue of a life spent becoming a person. We had brought a wallet the machine knew how to open. We never saw its arrival. We saw its subtraction. Light bent wrong above the torus, a dome of air with a density not equal to ours. The interference tone stepped a half-beat cleaner. The hairs on my forearms aligned as if stroked by a hand. In the bronze frame, the corridor image went flat, then deep, then produced a figure that looked man-high until the second glance. The limbs were a fraction too long, the shoulders too narrow, the head not quite sitting on the neck. Its surface read like skin if you wanted comfort, and like moving oil if you allowed the truth. It stood there without weight, and yet the floor around the frame accepted an impression you could not see with eyes, only with feet. The hum found a pitch that our bones adopted. When it spoke, sound lagged the intent. Words pushed through a medium with viscosity. It wasn't language first, it was transaction. The gist arrived across the top of my thoughts and then ran down the face of them into shapes like English. It said the system kept something contained. It said the binding required a constant payment in a currency the system did not mint. Our remanence, our leftover heat, in memory, in time, in that small electric around a person when you think their name and they call. It said Damascus was not the first name humans had given this. It said bridge and anchor and binder were all correct and none sufficient. Ash asked what the price was. He didn't ask why because why is a ghost question and we were past it. The answer came as a set of images I could feel in the mouth like a taste. A coin worn smooth by worry. A watch that lagged and then led, a tongue that had to learn words again. It offered the deal. Submit and be apportioned into the containment, pieces slivered thin as paint across a wall, or leave and accept the cost anyway, paid in unchosen installments. The voice was not a threat, it was a ledger closing. The offers took aim at the seams in us. It looked at Ash and showed him a map with no exits, only holds, promotion boards with rubber-stamped approvals, a desk with a view, a career that arrived in boxes. He would leave with command and lose the ability to command the hour he lived in. For Mac, it showed a patient's chart with all the vitals in range and the wrong name typed above it. He would leave knowing how to hold men together and lose the order of his own memories, scrambled across eras and species like a medical textbook spilled on the floor. For Hobbs, it put a detonator in his hand that clicked without click. He'd pay with touch, the nerves in his fingers replaced by machine tones, able to feel the weight of a charge and not his own child's grip. It came to Kite, and the taste in my mouth changed to tin and dry dust. He had spent his life listening to channels other men couldn't hear, pulling meaning from noise. The offer showed him a board of lights he could understand in any room, and a voice of his own replaced with the modulated ping of a test set. He would speak, and people would hear carrier, not content. Farah, who had said nothing, held his breath because it had found his throat. A phone vibrating in a pocket with a number he knew and a voice that would not find his name. A house upstream that remembered him like bad weather. He could walk back, and the river would tilt. For me, it produced the absence I carried. The ring, the box, the words not yet said. It showed me the picture of a table by a window in late light, and then took the light away and left the table. It made an accounting entry against time owed to a person who had agreed to receive it. I felt the ledger line scratch. It did not promise safety. It offered function. become part of the containment, spread thin, useful, woven into the binder, and the system would continue to hold. Leave, and our portions would be collected on exit anyway, because crossing the threshold was consent at a level it did not dignify with ceremony. There was no or else, only or now. Ash asked terms. The shape said math and pointed without pointing to the console to cost basis. The numbers ticked. Team size adjusted, 6. Nominal payment per hour, 1.38 priors. The unit meant nothing until it did. Priors were memories you favored, the heavy ones, the ones that let you stand a little straighter. Time-debt accrual stepped in decimals that tasted like metallic water at the back of the mouth. We didn't vote. We stood in a circle breathing machine air and human intention, and watched ourselves be measured. Ash said, "We are leaving." Hobbs looked at the manual pull and then at his own hands. Mac packed his kit with the slow accuracy of a man gauging what he'd still know tomorrow. Kite typed 3 nonsense commands and watched the console accept each and do nothing. Farah whispered to no one in Portuguese and backed away from the frame without turning his back. I put my hand on the Taurus's mount and felt heat tell a story about mass and distance, about bind, contain, awaken. The figure did not move. The light around it wobbled. The air above the Taurus thickened. Somewhere deeper, a pump that had not been on came on without sound, and the locus of heat in the room shifted 4 inches left. The deal held. The options didn't change, and the ledger clock in my head ticked up half a unit. We caused the failure without touching the wrong thing. Or we touched the wrong thing by standing in its field long enough to be counted as a component. The alarms did not come as sirens. They came as facts. Damascus Protocol. Hold, drift. The word drift blinked lazy and then quick. The interference tone separated into a staircase. The floor registered weight shifts that never settled. Geometry folded where the burned lines overlapped. A ripple that started at the bronze rings and ran the room like wind in wheat. Except the wheat was concrete. Ash called the exit. Hobbs reached for the manual pull on the scram interlock, and the safety wire lifted itself and then lay back down, neat as a taut child. Kite grabbed the burst handset and fired a transit. The LED strobed 3 times, then slowed and became a steady glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The screen printed "delivered" and "queued" on the same line. The clock on the laptop jumped forward 90 seconds, then back 40, then stabilized 4 seconds ahead. My watch lagged my wrist by a measurable thought. We moved toward the stair and found 2 versions of it. The nearer was ours. Hand oil on the rungs, a chip out of the second landing's edge we had made with a boot earlier. The further was clean by degrees, as if the room had been reset between uses and we were seeing a cleaned copy 1 unit to the right. Farah froze, because directly above the nearer stair on the landing cutout stood the back of a man who was Farah wearing our pack. Our Farah inhaled. The copy exhaled. The copy moved away and left no sound. Rooms larger inside than out make choices for you cannot consent to. We tried bullets because there is a point where you put metal into a question and see if it answers. Ash fired a single round past the bronze frame at a dead section of wall. The muzzle report arrived and failed to decay. A tone held too long in a small room. The round struck and did not strike. It became a flower of lead in midair and fell like a soft thing. Petals. The jacket peeled and curled like a fern. Hobbs swore and laughed at once. He fired a single at the floor. The path curved, lazy, and traced one loop of the burned geometry before lying down, obedient and wrong. Geometry went nonlinear. The consoles did not change their alignment, but the distance between them and our door tripled and halved as we walked, the way childhood hallways do in bad fevers. We crossed 5 meters that took us 30 seconds, and then crossed 5 that took us 2. The floor remembered the pressure of our boots in patterns we hadn't trod yet. The chalk on my glove came off in a circle where I'd never touched. The air had layers of temperature you could stack your hand through. Cool, hot, cool, like the skins of an onion you didn't cut. The entity communicated in pictures and postures. It put a countdown in my head that counted not numbers but doors. Kitchen door, bedroom door, school door, the last door you close on a night you remember later. It pressed the smell of a Christmas tree into my nose, and then the weight of a rucksack on a wet hill, and then the cold of a magistrate's lobby after a bad outcome. It didn't speak in fear. It spoke in leverage, the things you use to move a person where you want them. Copies of us appeared in positions we never occupied. Kite at the console with his hands stained by a grease we hadn't found. Hobbs by the Taurus holding a spanner I hadn't seen. Ash at the threshold with his weapon slung in a way he never slings it. The copies moved like people underwater, slow, decisive, decades away. When one flickered, the heat in the room stepped as if a curtain had been taken down and then put up again. Rooms inside rooms. Time on layaway. We tried voice, real voice. "You have what you need," Ash said, and the words bent as they left him, each syllable heard twice, once in air and once as an idea you could bite. The figure in the frame, a standing absence, tilted and then resumed. The carrier tones merged and separated like slow bells. The failure cascade had its centerpiece. One console changed lines. Isolation. Barrier. Phase error. The timing marks that had been offset by safe amounts slid toward each other with the inevitability of two men walking opposite sides of a river bend. I ran a hand under the Taurus bracket and felt a tremor not in the metal, but in the space around it, an insect vibration in the tooth. Hobbs said the word nobody says near machines, alive, and then bit it back. We pulled for egress and the corridor yielded length like rope. The stair that was ours accepted us. The stair that was neat did not. At the first landing, a copy of my hand was already there. Chalk line on the wall, letters written in my print that I had not written yet. Hold breath. I held my breath on reflex and my ears popped. Not because of climb, but because the pressure in the shaft stuttered. Up, down, up, against the set point of a regulator I couldn't see. The smell went sharp with ozone. My tongue tasted like a 9-volt battery pressed to it by a bored child. Behind us, the space folded again. The sound of footsteps learned us perfectly and then mislearned us, adding a 7th that belonged to no one we loved. The bullets we'd left on the floor rearranged themselves into a curve that traced the burned geometry and then stopped when we looked. The LED on the burst box went dark and bright with my pulse. The radio on my shoulder said connected in green and refused the world in practice. We did not run. Running provokes geometry. We moved with the care you use carrying hot tea across a moving deck. The entity's ideas pressed into our backs like the hands of a teacher pushing a child in a line. Forward, forward, forward. It taught us how to leave. It taught us we would not leave whole. We reached the ladder, and then we were on the surface with no climb between. No rungs, no counting breath, no argument with gravity. One step in concrete heat, and the next step in wet green air that smelled of rot and sun-warmed water. The hatch sat open behind us, resin torn, hinge seated like a jaw. The river noise returned in a slab, too loud, then right. I checked my watch and found the minute hand outside the numbers, hovering in white. I blinked and it snapped back, 4 minutes ahead of the wall clock in my head. Time did not pass. It rearranged. The boat lay where we left it if we believed the marks in the mud and did not believe the angle of the sun. My log said 11:07. The sky said mid-afternoon by a hand's width. Kite lifted the burst box and saw the LED a steady glow that pulsed with no pulse. The phone in his chest rig showed 3 voicemails from a number he had never given to anyone here, each marked yesterday with the same timestamp. He put it away the way a man puts away a wound. The cost took inventory. Ash stood a fraction light on his right leg. When he pulled his trouser hem, the calf below the knee ended in skin that had sealed smooth, the contour clean as a finished plaster. No scar, no seam, as if the body had decided to be smaller and had done so without blood. He tried to speak and said nothing for a second, shock's blank generosity, then squared his shoulders because command lives in posture, even when anatomy votes against it. Kite tried to call base, and his first syllable came out a perfect sine. Not a beep, not a stutter. A carrier tone at 1,000 hertz, clean and unmodulated, as if a test set had borrowed his voice. He swallowed, tried again, and managed words braided with tone, each vowel carrying a faint line like a watermark. You could understand him if you wanted to, the way you can read through rain on a windshield, but the radio liked the tone better. The net lit, then tripped, then went dark. Mac took my wrist to check a pulse and said my name in the wrong voice, calm, clinical, and then asked, "What's the Glasgow coma scale for a freshwater drowning?" He would know that in his sleep. Then he described in precise detail how to reduce a compound ankle dislocation in a cow and how you must not let the milk run in the parlor because it upsets the herd. The information came fluent, indexed, wrong field. When I asked him to list the steps for a chest seal, he gave them in Latin, correct and useless. Hobbs flexed his right hand and looked at the fingertips like he'd lost something small. The pads were intact, the nails clean, the skin unscarred. He picked up a cartridge and could read its weight in grains by feel, his face soft with recognition, then closed his hand around a twig and did not register the bark. "Feels like numbers," he said, voice steady. "Not textures. Like the world is a scale, not a surface." Farah touched his ear and frowned. The lobe was there. The cartilage curve was there. The memory of a bar fight scar was not. He couldn't recall the alley where he'd gotten it, or the name of the song that played inside, or the woman who had laughed when he bled and then stopped laughing and pressed a napkin in place. In its spot was a safe version, a neat clinic, a doctor with kind eyes, a bandage folded right. He knew it was false because the bandage in the memory had the logo of a hospital that closed before he was born. For me, the ledger made its entry in one quiet line. The ring box in my Bergen weighed the same and did not weigh the same. I opened it and found the notch where the stone should be, the felt worn by thumb, the smell of metal and old glue, and tucked under the pad a printed receipt with my hand on it. The date was 2 weeks from now. The store a place I had never visited. The card used a number that belonged to me. The cost reached forward and back at once. It took an unspent future and spent it, then left the present holding the bag. We moved with small purpose. Hobbs reseated the hatch because leaving it open offended the part of him that believed in orderly endings. The plate slid into place with a heavy cleanness. The heat coming off it had dropped a degree you could taste. The carrier tone in the trees remained, faint, running like a reference you can't turn off. We pushed the boat to water. The river accepted us in the way water accepts the bowl it's poured into, without comment. Our wake drew lines that looked like drafting curves. Kite keyed the handset, and the net gave us the shape of a reply without content, an envelope with no letter. He tried to say, "Exfil," and the tone braided through it hardened the word into something a machine might file. On the long bend downriver the time kink showed itself. We passed a fisherman we had passed hours earlier, same hat, same raised hand, same bare-chested boy watching the wake like a dog. The sun in his eyes said morning. The sun on our back said 4 in the afternoon. When we looked back, his canoe was not in the river. Nothing was. We hit the mud ramp at the forward base, and the captain in the stained T-shirt looked at us like we were late by a day and early by 2 hours. He asked if we found the kiosk. Farah said, yes, and the word fit neither truth nor lie, only the need to hand the moment back without imprint. Mac wrote no exposures in the medical line and had to think to spell no. Hobbs signed the explosives ledger with his left hand for the first time since he learned to write. We caught rotor wash, climbed in, left the rectangle cut from mud behind, the windsock limp, the mast whispering. The pilot looked at Ash's leg and didn't look again. He put us down in Tabatinga like he always did, clean, short, competent. The hangar smelled of hot dust and JP8 and stale coffee and the optimism of forms. In the prefab, a clock on the wall read a time that did not exist. 2 minutes between numbers, the second hand jumping with a stutter. Keat dialed the sat phone and got a hotel lobby's dial tone. He tried again and got the long-distance carrier from home, the one that sings the 3 rising notes. He spoke, and the test tone ghost wrote his vowels. "We're back," he said. The handset wrote battery 0%. It kept talking. When I closed my eyes to wipe sweat, I saw the bronze torus as a ring, and the ring as a torus, and the torus as a thing that binds because it cannot trust the world to hold still. I opened my eyes, and the prefab ceiling held still because ceilings must. My mouth tasted of copper and something like late summer on a rail line. We did not discuss cost in the way men do not remove shirts to compare wounds. We noted, we logged, we pretended function. The ledger kept its own copy. The debrief room was neutral on purpose. White paint grayed by years. A table whose metal edge left a taste on the tongue. A camera in a dome that pretended to be off. Provost sat opposite. Sunglasses gone now. Eyes as rested as if he'd slept through our night. He placed a form in front of each of us with boxes already ticked. Exposure, none. Contact, none. Material, found. Weather instrumentation, degraded. Photographic evidence, corrupted media, likely humidity. He slid pens across as if we were there to sign for parcels. Medical first, always, because the machine knows people believe screens. A clinic 2 doors down ran us through scanners that hummed comfort. Ash's sealed calf returned as artifact. Noted and dismissed, The ultrasound found a congenital variation that had not existed at birth. Kite spoke 3 numbers to test his voice, and the ENT wrote functional overlay, which is how you spell "we prefer not to engage." Mac's tests were all normal, bloods clean, ECG a neat cartoon. When he recited the Latin for a chest seal to an uninterested registrar, she typed anxiety-related perseveration and offered a leaflet. Hobbs's sensory exam showed within normal limits, because normal does not include weighing brass by thought. Farah's file printed with the scar in place, photographed clean, a neat suture line that had never been sewn. Back in the room, Provost slid a new stack. Our statements sat pre-written in the future tense. Team will insert. Team will survey. Team will extract. The auxiliary verbs used like handles. He asked us to confirm details of a mission not yet flown. The clock in the room read a time that made sense to no wall in the building. The fluorescent ballast sang the wrong note for the main's frequency. I could feel the hum in my fillings. He spoke to Ash as if to a colleague. Promotion slate clears this quarter. Desk with your name. To Mac. A posting with research hours. You'll have time to write. To Hobbs. Course instructor slot. No more sitting on tires wondering which wire to cut. To Kite. Transfer to a unit that appreciates your ear. To Farah. Local liaison billet. Close enough to send money, far enough to stay alive. It sounded like gifts and read like asset cataloging. We tried to tell it straight. Ash said hatch, heat, geometry, reactor. Provost wrote shaft, confined space, abandoned plant, generator. Mac said borated water and binder decay and cost basis. And the typist, there was a typist we had not noticed in the corner, small, efficient, rendered them as old signage, bad labeling, misread gauge. Kite said help context and scram interlock, and the transcript returned helped by local and scramble radio. Hobbs said Soviet hinge and sparks that died and flower of lead, and the line came back rusted hardware, wet steel, round deformed on rock. The camera in the dome clicked once like a throat cleared. Provost folded his hands. This is not the first time we have to write for 2 audiences, he said. One that reads and stays calm. One that reads and moves resources. He pointed at the stack destined for the calm. You sign these. He tapped a thinner stack behind his elbow. We keep these. He did not threaten. He offered the same thing the bronze room had offered. Function. You're useful as you are now, he said, not unkind. He glanced at Kite when the carrier tone laced a syllable and nodded as if in approval. We have need of connectivity that knows when to hold its tongue. He looked at Hobbs's steady hands. We have training cadres that could use a man who can feel mass by thought. He watched Mac count silently through a list he no longer controlled. We have clinics that need overseers who remember the right names even when the chart does not. To Ash. We have command tracks that require a man who can ignore the wrong leg. To me. We have signals gaps in places where the air tastes like copper. The promotions came on paper. The transfers came as emails received before we sat down to read them. The pay bands moved up by 1, then 2. The postings placed us farther from each other and nearer to the rooms that decide names for machines. Our gifts were renamed capabilities. Our costs framed as retained advantages. A policy brief slid across the table, unclassified, public, about non-ballistic mitigation in irregular spaces, the kind of phrase you use to make a thing disappear inside silted language. The last page had a box. Lessons learned. It was blank. It would remain blank in print and full in practice. Medical scans went back into folders with green stickers that meant no follow-up necessary. The leg with the smooth seal would be entered as a prosthetic miracle in one registry and as no change in another. The carrier in Kite's voice would be flagged as habitual laryngeal tension and quietly copied to a signals unit's recruitment list. Hobbs would be invited to guest lecture on charge placement ergonomics, and nobody would ask him why he wore gloves at dinner. Mac would sit on a panel about interdisciplinary protocols and never be asked to demonstrate a chest seal in English. Farah would get a laminated pass that worked in buildings where unplugged phones ring. We signed. We were thanked. Our kit was taken and returned with serials we did not recognize. The helmet cams offered previews of Jungle Nothing with perfect timestamps and empty buffers. The Geiger counters ticked politely and then went quiet. The burst box, when we tried it in the car park, lit once, twice, and then accepted a software update that erased its log. A young officer in a clean uniform walked past us humming a carrier tone he didn't know he knew. I went back to the prefab to collect the Bergen. The ring box lay exactly where it shouldn't have been. A voicemail waited from a number I didn't recognize. I pressed play. Her voice said my name and then said the line I had hoped to hear in a room that smelled of food and ordinary life. The timestamp read next week. The map on my phone placed the call at the corner where we had once talked about a lamp we couldn't afford. The world had filed our story early. On paper, we had done nothing and been nowhere. In practice, we had been drafted into a doctrine that doesn't brief. That is the shape of suppression. Not a black bag over the head, but a seat at a table you never asked to sit at, with menus already, printed and the bill already paid. I assemble the pattern in present tense because it refuses to sit still when told about in past. This is not a one-off. This is a line already laid into policy. The footprints are not in blood. They are in timing logs and procurement oddities and medical registries that lose and find the same people twice. Falklands, 19th June, 1997. SAS Training Detachment rotated through Mare Harbor under a disaster relief cover for a storm that never made landfall. Hardware. A decommissioned coastal radar bunker with a power draw larger than the island's grid could warrant on a quiet night. Anomaly. Underground heat signatures in a hexagonal pattern that persisted through rain. Outcome. Detachment returned with one NCO medically discharged for limb salvage with excellent prognosis. No amputation recorded, no scar recorded. Mobility paperwork added to a file that otherwise reads perfect. The unit's after-action uses the phrase binding drills once and never again. Murmansk Oblast, 04 February 2002. Spetsnaz team attached to a Federal Security Service inspection at a decommissioned P-14 Tall King radar node. Hardware, Soviet-era concrete, bronze fixtures of uncertain origin reclaimed as mounting points. Modern control racks with English-language overlays. Anomaly. HF carrier with heartbeat flutter detected on a band the station never used. Magnetometer readings along a corridor marked with burned-in geometry. Outcome. 2 operators reassigned to an unnamed technical directorate. One linguist's voice replaced with a pure tone noted in a local clinic as psychogenic and in a separate signals log as valuable. Official memo filed as inspection inconclusive, site sealed. DW line, Boothia Peninsula, 11th March 2010. USAF inspectors flown in under an environmental remediation brief. Hardware: an old L-band dish and a generator that ran with a perfect sign on bad diesel. A converter labeled in English and French tied into a bronze torus older than the pad it sat on. Anomaly: radar painting a contact at 0 range. Thermal stills showing colder-than-air rectangles hanging over warm snow. Time sync refusing GPS, accepting a drift 19 minutes ahead. Outcome: one tech's fingertips lose tactile registration while retaining mass discrimination. One officer's wristwatch logs hours not lived. Debrief archived under Material Accountability. Complete. Public note: none. North Atlantic, 22 August 2014. Navy SOSUS tech aboard a cable tender 120 nautical miles east of Nova Scotia. Hardware: seabed hydrophone array, junction box patched with quick splices, and a panel borrowed from a reactor training loop. Anomaly: non-acoustic signal coupled onto acoustic line. Copies of crew positions observed in the junction camera with delay. Bullets test fired into water curve, pedal, and sink obediently wrong. Outcome: 3 promotions to billets with no published org chart. 1 sailors. Medical knowledge expands and misfiles across species. Time discontinuity logged as instrument reset. The tender's deck log uses geometry event in pencil and erases it in pen. Amazonas State, 14th August, year withheld. Our case: hardware, a hatch with Soviet hinge logic, a chamber where bronze rigs are hardwired to modern control racks, a caisson-sized core with borated water, and a torus mounted above it. System name in all locations where it appears: Damascus Protocol. Core idea in each instance, stripped of myth. Nuclear power used not for power but as ballast. A dimensional anchor. A bridge. A binder. Cost measured in remnants, memory, time, human signal, accruing per hour. Team size adjusted. The echoes fall into a doctrine even when no one writes it down. Identify old structure where geometry has been burned into concrete or stone. Lace it with modern control. Label the interfaces in English, regardless of country. Use fission as the steady hand on a door that doesn't open in a human plane. Pay the bill in what walks into the room with you. Hide the receipts in medical artifacts, career opportunities, and debriefs that say the mission will happen yesterday. This is already global. This is already doctrine. The names change: Angkor, Bridge, Binder, but the screens I've seen in photographs and the plates I've held in my hands prefer one: Damascus Protocol. The ledger runs, the rooms breathe, and the footsteps that don't leave prints continue to learn our cadence, half a beat behind. It's here now. I don't need to dramatize that line. The room does it for me. The lights over my desk flicker in a cadence that matches the burned geometry I copied from the concrete. 3 short, 1 long, a pause, then the same again, as if a diagram learned how to breathe. My watch says 1902 and 1907 at the same time. The minute hand hovers between ticks like a dragonfly over dark water and then lands where it didn't try to go. I hold the watch to my ear and hear no tick, only the low transformer hum I tasted in the jungle. Footsteps outside the door begin and fail to complete. They don't belong to a human gait. They double the cadence and then slip half a beat behind, practicing me. The hallway sensor shows no motion. The carpet shows no pile disturbed. The drywall carries a faint warmth I can feel with my palm as if someone has exhaled through it. Ozone rides the air, that battery on the tongue bite. A thin grit settles on the papers like very fine graphite. When I breathe, I can taste old coil and copper penny and something sweet, like overheated phenolic. I check the files. The recordings from the helmet cams still load as previews and refuse to exist as saves. The console screenshots, Damascus Protocol. Status hold. Display correctly until I press print, then return a test page with alignment bars that are not mine. The page smells like warm plastic. The toner carries a faint iridescence when I tilt it, the sideways color that lived on those black grains. The laptop clock jumps forward 12 seconds, then back 4, then waits as if listening for permission. I lock the door, and the lock becomes ceremonial. The footsteps pause on the other side, as if the mechanism's decision amuses them. The peephole shows the hallway stretched, not long, but wrong, a perspective I know too well from rooms designed to fold. When I lean close, the brass ring around the peephole warms against my skin. I pull back, and there is the smell of hot dust, the smell of a machine that has run through the night without company. It chooses the moment to pay off my human stake. The ring box is on the desk where I left it, felt worn, corner rubbed smooth by worry. I open it, and the ring is in it now, stone seated where the notch had been, the metal warm as if from skin. The receipt still reads 2 weeks from now. The engraving on the inside lip includes a date we have not reached and a word I did not choose. I tried to say that word, and the syllables don't belong to my mouth. When I blink, the stone is gone. The notch is back. The felt smells faintly of solder and rain. The phone vibrates on the desk without lighting. The screen is empty. The vibration carries the rhythm of the burned geometry in my notes. I lift the handset. There is no call, only a line tone from a hotel lobby in another city that I can see in my head, glass turning streetlight into soft bands. A voicemail icon appears, then disappears. The log says the message will arrive tomorrow at 03:41. I know the content. I have already heard it. The voice says my name and says yes, and laughs in a way a recorder cannot write down. It ends with a small breath that becomes a carrier tone as if something borrowed the laugh on its way out. The desk lamp stutters. The shadows move as if there were a second, cleaner room slightly offset from this one. In the offset room, my notes are aligned straighter. The ring box is open and the stone is notched in. In the offset room, I am not here because the door is never closed. The smell of the hall pushes through the wood again, green cleaner and metal and the human salt that lives in carpets. Under it, the copper. Under that, hot coil. I open my notebook to the page where I copied the wall marks. The ink bled there when I pressed too hard. The lines settle in under the desk light. I count 3, 1, pause, 3, 1, and the ceiling fixture accepts the count and flickers to it. I stop and it continues, the way a metronome continues after you have learned its beat in your hand. I put my palm on the page. The paper is warm. The warmth has a pattern, like a pulse, but not mine. The pen tastes of metal when I bite it without thinking. The footsteps start again, away now, then nearer, then over me, as if on a floor that is not built above this room. The air pressure dips. I swallow, and my ears pop. A hairline of plaster dust drops from the ceiling and lands in a neat ring around the notebook. The particles glitter without color when the desk lamp hits them. The glitter slides sideways, not spectrum, not rainbow, an obedience to a rule I am still learning. The laptop speaker clicks without notification. The console window I left open. the one that shows nothing local, no process I can kill, prints a single line I did not invite. Cost basis. Accruing. Team size adjusts from 1 to 2 to 3 and stops at a number that matches the active devices on my network, plus the phone, plus the watch. The number in the quiet part of my head ticks up a fraction and leaves the taste of warm plastic on my teeth. I hear a hand on the knob that isn't a hand. The metal warms. The lock listens. The footsteps outside match me now. When I hold my breath, they hold. When I breathe, they breathe. When I lift the ring box and feel the notch and not the stone, they lift something I cannot see and feel weight. The light in the hall dies for one long count and returns one count out of phase. My watch's second hand makes a full circle without moving. I am not alone in the room because I have never been alone in any room where the field is live. The machine temple is not in the jungle. The jungle was a mouth to teach us the taste. The door breathes. The page warms. The hum moves from the wall to the bone. The ledger turns its page without ink. Listen to me. The cadence you hear under my voice is not an audio bed. It's the burned geometry arriving in your speakers. Your devices do not need permission to enroll. Keep this playing, and the footsteps that practice me will practice you. That is what Damascus costs. It binds, it contains, it awakens, and it invoices the listener.